Welcome to Office 2010 video number 19. Hey, this is our second video about Excel. We have Windows Explorer open. We are looking inside our class notes Excel folder, and boom, there's the first file we created, Project 1 Gradebook. Now we're going to do a little accounting example, do some formatting formulas, a chart and page setup. Again, this is intro project number 2. So let's get on it. I'm going to click on the taskbar, the shortcut, or you can use the Start button to open up Excel. I'm immediately going to hit F12. That's Save As. I'm going to navigate to my class notes for Excel. Winter 2016 class notes Excel. I'm going to change this to net income projections. Now I'm going to change the file extension here, and I want to just remind you, we've already seen this. Notice when I was in Excel over here, and when I open up a dialog box like Open or Save As, I can see what's in this folder, but the file type or extension is a filter. So if I go ahead and change this, I'm going to change this to .xlsm. Remember, the difference between .xlsx, which we used in our last project, is that you're not allowed macros or VBA code. In this file format, you're allowed to do macros or VBA code. Now in this class, we don't use macros or VBA code. But notice what happens as soon as I select this extension, boom, I can only see similar files with the same extensions. And since that folder has no .xlsm files with that extension, I can't see it. If I were to change it back to the .xlsx, then of course I could see that. All right, we're going to leave it .xlsm. Where do you want to save it? What do you want to call it? And what type? Click Save. Now I'm going to hold Control and roll and zoom in a bit. We're going to just build a basic income statement, but we're going to project. This is going to be a budget. This is what we're going to assume is going to happen next period. Now we have net income projections here. I'm going to come down to the Sheet tab as we did in our last video. I'm going to double click, and I'm going to call this 2012. Enter. Now in cell A1, I'm selecting A1. I actually want to hit Tab and go to B1 and type JAN. Control Enter because I want to put that thing in the cell and keep the cell selected. Again, we do that as opposed to Enter or Tab when we're immediately going to do something to the cell. And I'm immediately going to point to that fill handle and drag over. We're going to estimate all the way to May. Now in cell A2, I'm going to type REV revenue. Enter. Expenses. Enter. Net income. Enter, enter. Now, in our last video, we saw how to make formulas. And in that video, we saw how to use cell references. Now, this video, we're going to do the same thing, formulas, cell references to calculate our revenue and expenses. However, we're going to put some formula inputs down below in this area. And all that allows us to do is we're going to say, hey, for January, we're going to assume that it's going to start at 1,000, and then we're going to assume that it increases by 5% each month. And so we don't want to hard code those numbers into our formulas. We want to build a little area down here called assumption, either an assumption table or formula inputs, put our starting numbers, and build all the formulas in this table based on those. Then we have an area where we can change the inputs, and all of our formulas and our resultant chart will update. So I'm going to click in, say, A7 and type assumptions. And then in parentheses, these are really formula inputs. Again, that's another synonym for this type of action we're going to do here is called what if analysis. Now we're going to assume that January revenue, and I'm going to shorten that, will start at $1,000. We're just going to do a simple example. We're going to assume that a the revenue increase each period is going to be 5%. I'm going to hit Tab. And the revenue increase, that means each subsequent month, we would like the revenue to go from 1,000 to 1,050 to 1,000, whatever it is, increasing by 5%. Now, the way we're going to do that is we're actually going to put 1.05. That is a number we can multiply by this, and it will give us exactly 5% increase. All right, I'm going to hit Enter. There's actually another video posted, a short little video about why this is true, why this works. All right, and finally, we need to have a calculation up here for expenses, and we're going to estimate the expenses based on our revenue. And so we're going to type expense as a percent of revenue. Expenses as a percent of revenue. And this is a very common tactic in budgeting, accounting, finance, etc. I'm going to hit Tab. And we're going to estimate that for every $1 of revenue, we're going to spend 0.65, 65 pennies. I'm going to hit Enter. Right? So every $1 of revenue, 65 cents of that dollar will be used up for expenses. Another way to think of that is if we added the percent format like we did in the last video, this would be 65%. By the way, this would be 105%. All right, now we want to come up here and we want to start to build our formulas. Actually, we need one more field name or column header here, so I'm going to type total. And I'm going to Control Enter. I actually would like to format. Actually, I shouldn't have Control Enter. I want to come down here. I want to fix this up, this column here first before we move on to this table here. I'm going to click between the A and the B right there. And when I see that cursor, I can click and drag. All right, so I'm going to click and drag just so I see that parentheses on the inside of this edge of the column right here. Now, I want to highlight. I'm going to add some format here, and then we're going to format this table and build our formulas. I want to use the keyboard shortcut to highlight the whole table. Control asterisk. That's the asterisk on the number pad. And then I'm going to add a border right here. Actually, probably we should highlight these two cells. That's the selection cursor. You click and drag. And I'll add some red and some white. Now, let's format this table up here. I'm going to click in G1, and I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut, Control asterisk. Add some borders. Now, everything up in this table is going to be formulas. So I'm going to click here, and the very first thing we need in January revenue is to get this number showing up here. So we simply do a formula. As we saw in our last video, the character that tells Excel we are going to do a formula is the equal sign. Equal sign is the first character. I'm simply going to take my selection cursor, click on B8. That's all we need. Tab. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to actually pre-format this because we're going to, these are all dollars. I'm going to use my selection cursor, click and drag. Notice we're highlighting part of the table, so we can't use that Control asterisk. And I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control 1. That's format cells. All right, I'm going to select currency and then click OK. Now, as we move along here, the columns may not be wide enough, and we'll fix that as we go. All right, formula for February. It's got to say, hey, January revenue increased by 5%. So I'm simply going to say equals this, the revenues from last month, which is one cell to my left, times this amount right here, B9, whatever's in B9. Tab. And there we have it. We have a 1,050. Now, technically, when you take, I'm going to hit F2. When you take this amount and multiply it by 1.05, that 1 says 1 times this is 1,000. And then 0.05 is the extra little increased amount. So whatever that is. So 1.05 is just a real cool way to get 5% increase. Now I'm going to hit Tab. Now let's do March. Equals, oh yeah, the revenue from last month, which is in terms of Excel formulas, one cell to my left, times B9. Tab equals one cell to my left times B9. You see the pattern? Every time the blue box is one cell to my left, so as we copy the formula, that blue box should be moving. But that B9 should not be moving. Every time we have to click there. Is there an easier way to do that? Sure there is. Just like last video, if we use a combination of relative and absolute cell references, we don't have to create each formula individually by hand. I'm going to highlight all those. Leave that one, because that one's a different formula. Hit delete. By the way, what's the keyboard shortcut for delete? One thing you never want to do in Excel is go right-click delete. Now, I say never. That's not really true. There are some rare circumstances where deleting cells is good. Click delete, right? But not here in Excel. Watch what happens. Shift cells up. That means it's actually going to delete those and move everything up. In some cases, you can destroy your spreadsheet when you do that. So I'm going to click escape. The keyboard shortcut is just delete. The delete key itself deletes the content. So I delete. All right, let's try our formula again. That character that starts a formula, equal sign. One cell to my left times B9. Now, in the last video, we learned the keyboard shortcut to put the secret characters in to lock that cell. The F4 key. There's our secret code. Remember, this was arbitrary. They just picked this symbol when spreadsheets were invented. It's a dollar sign. It just means the column reference is locked because there's a dollar in front of it. And the row reference, the number, is locked because there's a dollar sign in front of it. All right, Control Enter. Point to that little fill handle when you see your angry rabbit. Click and drag. Now, we have to verify that our formula is correct. You can't just look at the surface number and audit your formula and tell if it's correct. The way to do it is to hit F2, or you can look up here. But I'm going to hit F2. People that can look up here, no problem. E2, B9. But watch this. If you hit F2, the beauty of range finder is that you get these little color-coded boxes. Then you don't have to, visually count how many columns in a row. No way. The blue one's one to my left. The green one is locked on B9. Perfect. Now, our expense formula. The way it works is we have 0.65. For every $1 here, 65 cents is going to be used up as expenses. Same with here and here. So I'm going to click here. Formula, that means we have to do what character? Equal sign. Now, as we copy this formula over, we're always going to be looking one cell above at the revenue for this month. So I'm going to hit the up arrow. Remember, there's two ways to put cell references in formulas. You can either use your mouse or your up arrow. The only time you use your up arrow is if the cell references are really close in, because it's quick to just hit that up arrow. All right, now I'm going to hit times and click on B10. Tab equals one cell above times B10. All right? Tab equals one cell above times B10. All right, hopefully you're getting tired of this by now. But most of us that are learning, we're probably not tired. We're probably just used to building formulas like this. But no way. Observe the pattern. Every time the blue box is above, one cell above, which means relative, and we're clicking on B10 every time. As soon as you have a pattern like that, you know you can go back to the original cell and lock the cell reference. Then you're allowed to copy it over. So I'm going to click Tab, highlight, delete. Click in this cell, equals one cell above times B10. And what's the keyboard shortcut? F4. Now, F4 puts the dollar signs in front of the column reference and row reference. Later in this class, we'll learn there's not just relative and absolute. There's a couple other types of cell references also. But at this point in the class, you just want to try and learn the difference between relative and absolute. Locked. Control Enter. And I'm going to point to the fill handle, click and drag. Now I'm going to do a little experiment here. I'm going to click here and hit F2. Is the blue one directly above? Yeah, in essence, when we copied it, moved, but not B10. It's locked. Tab, F2. Blue one moved, green one locked. Tab, F2. That B10 is still locked down. I love those dollar signs. Tab, F2. That's called auditing. Now, technically, when you copy a formula like we did, like that, you really only need to check the last one. You go to the last one, hit the F2 key, and boom, just like magic, we have saved a lot of time building this little income statement table here. All right, so cell references and formulas do two great things. One is if you know how to use absolute and relative and other cell references, you can build the formula quickly. The other beautiful thing about them is we can just come down here. Your boss says 65%. Are you kidding? It's actually 75. So you type 0.75 and watch. Instantly, everything will update when I hit Enter. Just like that. All right, let's leave it at 0.75. Now, net income. For the accountants in the class, that's right, equal, that's the symbol that says, hey, Excel, I'm doing a formula. 2 cells above, oh, you always take revenue minus 1 cell above expenses. So net income is revenue minus expenses. Hopefully, it's net income. Sometimes you have a net loss. Actually, later in the class, we'll see a great formula that will allow us to have variable labels depending on what the formula result is. But for us right here, we just want to notice, always, this is the formula. When I copy it over, it's always going to be looking 2 cells above minus 1 cell above. Tab equals 2 cells above minus 1 cell above. I definitely have already noticed that as I copy this over, it's always going to be the 2 cells above. So I'm going to Control Enter, point to my fill handle. When I see my angry rabbit, click and drag. Click in the last one, hit F2. Beautiful. Look at that. These are both relative cell references because the inputs for this formula are always 2 cells above. I'm going to hit Escape. Now, total. Few ways to do this. We're going to use the keyboard shortcut from now on. We're not going to use this. The keyboard shortcut is, and why do you want to learn this? Well, first off, it's fast. And when you take that interview and they give you an Excel test, you're going to be like, sum function, Alt equals, and they're going to go, wow. All right, now, it's always a 2-step process when you're doing a function. Remember, because it guesses. Did it guess right? It did in this case. Control Enter. Now, remember, we can click and drag this down right. But last video we saw, as long as there's stuff to the left, or for that matter, to the right or below, you can just double click the fill handle and send it down. I'm going to click in this last one right here and hit the F2 key, which is Edit. Absolutely beautiful. All right, now let's add a little bit of formatting here. I want to highlight with my selection cursor. And then I want to hold the Control key to highlight cells that are not next to each other. I'm holding Control, click and drag. And I'm going to add a little fill and a little font color. Again, out in the working world, it's about half and half. Half the people like to do formatting. The other half say, forget that. Don't need the formatting. All right, now we want to make a chart. And we're going to make our first chart here. And what I would like is I would like a chart that just to show me the net income. Now, not the totals, just the net income. And the labels I want are January, February, March, April, May. Well, how are we going to make a chart like that when the labels are here and the numbers we want for the chart are here? We're going to use our same trick. Highlight the labels, hold Control, and highlight the numbers. Now, there's various types of charts we can make. In this case, we just want to show a column chart, which will show us the height based on each number. And because it's going up, we'll see a continually increase in the size of the column. Now, we have some videos later in this class that will go into detail about charts. We'll just look at a basic couple things here. Now, inserting a chart. Insert. Oh, there's the chart group. There's a bunch of cool charts we could use. I'm going to click Column. Column. And I'm going to select this first one right here. And just like that, we have a column. Now, too big, so I'm going to point to the edge. And this is just like pictures and objects we saw in Word and PowerPoint. You can click on the edge when you see that diagonally pointing arrow. You can click and drag. Now, once you select it, and we'll fix the chart up, I want to move it. The move cursor is just like we saw earlier in this class with Word and PowerPoint. That's the move cursor. You click and drag. Now, charts. We'll talk in much more detail later, but is this adding anything to the chart, Series 1? No. There's a name for this. It's called chart junk. So I'm going to select it. And what's the keyboard shortcut for delete? That's right, delete. Already looking 100 times better. One thing we do need on this is there's some dollars here and some months. But what is it? Is it inventory? Is it net income? We need some sort of indication that this is net income. So with the chart selected, I'm going to go out. Oh, look, a bunch of context-sensitive ribbons. Design, I'm going to go to Layout. And then here's Labels, the Labels group. So this is the Chart Tools, Layout, and then Labels. Chart Title, I'm going to say Above Chart. Now, the way labels work, and we'll see a second method later in this class, but as soon as it's highlighted, you could actually just start typing. And I'm going to type net income. Now, when this new way of adding chart titles came out in Excel 2007, I was confused. I was like, what? I don't see anything changing here. But I've been typing net income. Sure enough, it's actually happening up in the formula bar. So income. Now, it doesn't fully register until what? Just as our sheet name, we have to hit Enter. And now we can see it right there. That's all we're going to do with our charts. Now, later we'll get to see all sorts of cool things with charts. But what we do want to see is what happens when we change our formula inputs. So let's just change the starting number. Now, remember, if I click up here in F2, that's just looking there. All these other formulas are actually based on this, because revenue's based on that. Expenses are based on all of those, net income, and the chart. So I'm going to click Escape. I'm going to change this to 1,000. Oh, sorry. 5,000. That was totally anticlimactic, right? 1,000. Well, that's what it was before. 5,000. Enter. And sure enough, everything updates, including these railroad tracks. And look at this. This updates perfectly. Now I'm going to Control Z and just look what happens on the chart. Control Z. Sure enough, absolutely amazing. That means everything's linked. How do I undo an undo? It's called redo. It's right there. Control Y. Now what's happening over here, those are railroad tracks or pound signs. It means you're squishing me. The column's too thin, too small, too narrow. So I'm going to come up here and double click. And it best fits. All right, one last thing for this video. We're going to do some page setup. Now let's just go look, just like we did in the last video. Control P in Office 2007, they've combined print preview and the print dialog box. So for print preview, I can see I want to change the orientation to landscape. And maybe add some headers and footers and center it. I'm going to click Escape. Remember, this X up here will close the whole workbook. You either have to click this or Escape. Just as we saw in last video, page layout. And I'm going to use the page setup dialog box. And I'm going to use the Alt keyboard shortcuts. Alt, and you can see that P. P, that enacts this. SP. Alt, Escape, Alt, PSP. Now, you know, that's 4 clicks on the mouse, but it's actually a lot faster if you're typing and doing stuff like that than taking your cursor and coming up here and clicking. All right, now I'm going to change it to landscape. I'm going to increase the size to about 120. Go over to margins. This is exactly like we did in our last video. Horizontal. Totally, you could see the preview there. Header and footer. Remember, there's preview, built-in, custom. I'm going to go down to footer. There's a built-in one, so I'm going to select that. Page 1 of question mark. There it is, the preview. I don't have a built-in one here, so I'm going to come up to Custom Header. There's 3 sections. The left section, I'm going to give it the workbook name, which would be Net Income Projections. Tab. The sheet name is 2012, the year, so I'm going to put that. Tab. And then I'm going to put date. Notice that date right there. And I'm going to type something, space, dash, space. And then I'm going to put time. File name, sheet tab name, date, and time. These are all dynamic. So if I change that or this, the actual workbook name, save as a different name, change the sheet tab, or the date and time, they're all dynamic. Click OK. I don't think we have to do print area. We did print area in the last video. I'm going to click OK. Control P to look and see what it looks like. And sure enough, that's looking just fine. Absolutely beautiful. We can make it a little bit bigger if we wanted to. You can actually access page setup right from page dialog, print preview. This is actually called a backstage view. Click page setup. And I'm going to look at it. It comes up right here. I'm going to say 140. No, 135. And then click OK. Look at that. Totally cool page setup again. 145. Can I squeeze it on? Broop. Looks like I can. I'm going to click Escape and Control S. Let's just try something. Let's change this to, I'm going to double click the sheet tab name and change it to 2013. Enter. And now I'm going to Control P. Sure enough, look at that. The dynamic header and footer are automatically changing. You can see that it changes. If we changed the file name, that would change also. Control S. All right, that's project 2, our intro. The next 10 to 20 short little snippets videos will be all about the nuts and bolts of Excel. All right, see you next video.